Welcome back. It's season 3 of Growth Department, and we've got a treat. We are diving into category design. My guest today is Jason Wellcome. He's a partner at Play Bigger, the team that created category design. And he's got 2 decades of experience helping tech giants, global brands, and fast-growing startups define the problem they solve and quickly become the leader of a new category. He's also the author of The Existing Market Trap, here to tell us how to avoid falling into some common traps when positioning your company and how to create and dominate a category if you're looking for exponential growth. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to dive into the conversation.
Let's set the stage because some folks might have read Play Bigger or know what this is, what we're about to talk about. What is category design?
Category design, now we would start with the problem. What problem does category design solve, right? We always say, especially when we talk with, the companies we work with, it's everyone wants to talk about this solution, this thing that they do, right? But really what people care about is what's the problem you solve and how do I relate to that? So category design is a discipline, a process that solves this problem called the existing market trap, where existing markets are frames that have been around and existed for a while. And if you're doing something truly new and unique and different and solving an unsolved problem, you're an entrepreneur, you're building this business, trying to compete within an existing market, you're at a distinct disadvantage. And that you should create the market, you should create the category so that you don't get boxed in by what exists today. So category design is that process of creating and designing a new category, built one that you can own, one that you can build, one that you can grow into, the one that doesn't that sets a ceiling much higher than what exists today.
And you've been in this line of work for a while. What drew you to it?
Oh, man. Well, I think experiencing not doing it well is what drew me to it. So, I came up in tech over the years and had a winding career and both grew up in the Northwest. So working around heavyweights like Microsoft and Amazon, and realized, we were in a lot of the divisions and work that I was doing within Microsoft was, media, actually transforming and digitizing media. Right. And so a lot of the work was around how do you compete within, the iPod category, right? Digital music and whatnot. And having this amazing technology, superior technology to even what Apple and iPod had, but still not winning at the end of the day. Went on to sort of build a company within the agency that I was in called MediaCo. And again, at that time, didn't realize it, but we were creating new category. We were doing something different. We were teaching companies that every company is a media company now as social media explodes and the internet and going direct was a new thing, right? It wasn't. These things weren't around at the time, podcasts and everything, or at least it's easily accessible. And having this huge success early on and early win, but then all of a sudden, everyone catching up and the noise overcrowding us and us losing the plot and it sort of falling apart a little bit. Not falling apart, but just not necessarily having the enduring success that I would expect from our early first mover advantage. And then trying to repeat that and realizing, I don't know the formula for this. And then I stumbled into Play Bigger, the book. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we were actually creating a new category. And we didn't define the problem. The first and most important step was defining what problem do you solve. And we did define it, but we didn't really evangelize and own that and really use that as center of gravity. And we many times, and if you look at, from the Microsoft experience all the way up through to, building MediaCo, shiny object syndrome, like chasing the next feature and cool thing. And all of a sudden it just all doesn't gel or fit together. You don't really know what you stand for anymore. And therefore customers don't really value you the way that they should. And so that led me to the doorstep of, I started to work at some startups, bringing that philosophy, having learned it, and also the learnings I took from those experiences. And I ended up just reaching out to Al, the CEO and founder of Play Bigger, and said, hey, we should work together. Yeah, I got this project. We should work on it. And bam, 5 years later, I'm still doing it and loving it. And it grew into a passion because you get the experience, the exposure that you get to, and the value you're able to create with these founders and companies that you work with is just so rewarding. And you get to, and I'm a bit of like, I like to be exposed to a lot of different ideas and thinking. So that the scope of that exposure in the work that we do is from tech companies to consumer companies, to even, I can talk through like, civic minded movements that have borrowed from the philosophy in order to sort of rally and align people around a shared problem in order to actually move the needle on making change happen in a community. So just seeing the power of the process and then the exposure to great minds and brilliant founders and their teams and being able to help them achieve and really do what I think is, I have just a tremendous amount of respect for anyone that's trying to go out there and build something and do something different, and being able to help them on that journey and have this success that, we know that one of the biggest blockers to that success is competing within an existing market. How do you break free of that? It's just really rewarding, and it's certainly addictive. That's for sure.
Yeah. And sounds fun.
Yeah.
You have the book behind you there. I've listened to Play Bigger on tape because I'm an audio girl. It's been 10 years since the publishing.
Yeah.
What's changed since 2016 in category creation?
Well, I think the foundational pillars that are in Play Bigger are more relevant than they ever were, I think. Mm. So in many regards, that not a lot has changed in that. The steps, what's required, learning from the greats, and understanding that this is a discipline that's codified from greats that have done this over years. We talk about Clarence Birdseye and there about how he developed the frozen foods category, right? Mm-hmm. So those principles and those tenets, those key pillars of the discipline are still very relevant, if not more relevant, because of, we're going through a massive change shift and, another platform shift in AI. I think the things that's changed in our mind too is the applicability of it, that it's expanded. I think when the book was first written, it was very much focused on these hyper growth pre-IPO companies, in addition to like companies that needed to find their second act, that would create a category and then need to build on top of that, right? It reached maturity, and now you need to continuously expand or create the next category. What we found is like the process really and the discipline really applies to early stage founders, even the earliest of stages, thinking about like, how do I use this framing to make sure that I also have focus and discipline and how I execute in order to get to that hyper growth stage. But as I mentioned earlier, there's also been, we've done some work with like local community initiatives around this, just to see if it could work and apply in that sort of forum. And it does. It really has an impact on how do you start to, and it comes down to what we realize is it comes down to how do you start to make sure how do you build belief and shared belief amongst a growing group of people? And with companies, it starts with, the executive, the leaders, the founders, and then we want to expand that out to the broader company, and then ultimately take that outside the four walls of a company in order to, drive the category and understand this new thing, right? It's the same thing within a community. If you think about it, it's how do you start to build a shared language and a point of view that everyone can rally around, and hopefully can allow you to actually find common ground and then move forward with decisions around that common ground.
For folks listening, you mentioned a few things there. What's category versus positioning versus branding when someone's going through the rest of this conversation?
Yeah. And I would say like we get that question a lot. And we also have in the existing market trap, the latest addition to sort of the prequel to Play Bigger, we go into a thing on positioning as well. And what I would say at a high level, category design is really about, is the discipline that sort of everything else sort of falls out of that. Like positioning tends to fall out of that. It's like a superposition, so to speak, right? Branding tends to then be impacted by the category design work, because it really is about what problem do you solve and what do you actually do at the baseline level. And then how does that create a new market on the other end of it, right? And once you establish that, then you can say, okay, then what's the brand? How does the brand reinforce that? And then how do we use that to position ourselves as different, not something better, right? We talk a lot about the importance of different is way more important than being better. Better is incremental, different is exponential opportunity. So in many ways, they're derivative, I would say, of category design. And positioning in itself, if you just start there, it's the trap is what we would call it. It's the existing market trap personified, right? It is by itself, when you say your position, you are positioning yourself within an existing market. And so you are resigning yourself to compete within that versus create what's new, be different versus, be better. Right.
Mm.
And so that's kind of how we think about it. And again, how I've seen it play out and hold true for many of these engagements.
I've got it right here. The beautiful
Yeah.
existing market trap for those just listening. Tell us about this primer project.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that's been even ever since, 5 years ago when I joined Play Bigger, it's something that's been on the top of our mind, certainly on top of Al, our CEO and founder's mind, right? And it comes down to what we admit in the beginning of the book is, what problem does category design solve? What problem does Play Bigger solve? And we've taken a couple hacks at it over the years. We put our own point of view together and all that, but it wasn't quite resonating the way that we felt like it should be more powerful. It should be what we're achieving with our companies, right? And so the existing market trap was just finally that it clicked in of what problem is it that category design solves, right? Play Bigger was really the thesis on what is category design, why does it matter, how do you actually, and what I love about Play Bigger is like, how do you actually go through it? What are the key core pillars of designing a new category and why it's important? And there's some research around why all that. The existing market trap is why we say it's the prequel, is like, okay, but what problem does it solve, right? And it talks about what, that markets as they exist today are, and compete within them, are inherently, they are traps. They inherently reduce the potential and the growth that you can have as a company, especially, again, like I said earlier, if you're doing something fundamentally new or different. So that once it clicked and we realized like that's what it is, it just flowed onto paper. We have to put this out into the world. We have to do it quickly, in fact, because at the time when last year when we were writing the book, it was just so clear that it was needed by founders. There was the titanic shift of, AI showing up and everyone trying to bolt on AI. And it was also accelerating timelines and of categories emerging. And what we saw it as, it's one of those change shifts that's going to redefine and destroy old categories and create new ones overnight. And so understanding the perils of approaching that world through an existing market lens, we thought it was really important to expose that problem and then also show within that primer a way out. And so if you have had a chance to read it, or if you get to read it, you'll see that it's not like the dense, thick stories. It's very quick insights. It's almost like a field guide to understanding that problem, but also how that problem might apply to you. We have what we think these things called 13 deadly sins that are essentially the way the trap shows up to various different companies at various different stages. And then we always try to provide like, how do you break free of that trap? Give a few examples of that, but also some watch outs around like positioning and how you think about AI as you create a new category, create a new market.
And there are 13 deadly sins.
That's right. Yeah.
They have cute names too. You've touched on a few of them so far, but what's one that stands out to you as like a lot of people are falling into this trap right now?
Oh man. I do think like there's the engineer's dilemma is the one that tends to show up around new technology shifts, these big waves where everyone thinks like their cool new shiny object, their cool new technology is the thing that people will care about, right? And that at the end of the day, nobody really understands it and nobody really cares except as much about it as you do. And so framing it around, and again, getting the solution bias that you tend to see from companies, that they talk about what we do versus what's the problem we solve first, and then how we solve that problem and why that problem is so important. So I think the engineer's dilemma is just ripe all over. It's everywhere, right? When it comes to these big technology shifts, for sure.
Are you seeing folks just shipping a new, like, oh, I have a new AI startup, boom, it's out there, and then that's it? They don't go through any of these why does it matter steps?
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, or you just get these brilliant founders that have done something really amazing, but they're fixated on trying to explain why it's so amazing, and they haven't given the frame for belief to spread beyond their own sort of their conviction. And what's interesting is that the process of like, hey, I'm going to go build this really powerful thing and go to this existing total addressable market, and I'm going to steal all the share. That all kind of makes sense logically. But when you get into the work and the research said why that is such a bad idea and why behavioral psychology and all this work that Kahneman and folks have published around behavioral psychology, why why it doesn't work out that way and why it's so important for you to actually frame it a new frame, and actually in order for people to then understand what it is that you're doing and give you the value that you believe that you should have for that thing. No one that we work with is dumb, but they're doing some of these things that they're slipping into these old ways of operating. And so I do think for this idea of like shiny object syndrome, where I kind of talked about me having that issue, and I was like, oh, there's this, you can do this, you can do this now, you can do this now, and you just kind of jump to the cool thing. It's easy to get caught up in that slippery slope, as I would put it. But going back to the foundation of like, what is the problem? Truly, what's the problem that scopes a market opportunity? Not all the bag of problems that you can solve with it, but what is the higher order problem that unifies all these problems that you can solve? And how does that, being the evangelist for that, how does that change how people view the world and ultimately view you? And what we believe, and this is proven out in behavioral psychology too, is if you evangelize the problem, people will inherently turn to you for the solution. Like if you know, and again, categories show up around problems that haven't been solved and problems people didn't even know they had typically. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about a problem and someone's like, oh my gosh, I was down here in the weeds with these little, feeling the pain, you just identified the problem that I'm really having. Clearly you must have the solution. And so it has this, the problem has this power of then orienting people to then like, now tell me about your amazing thing, because mm-hmm. I already believe that you can solve this problem because you've articulated it in a way that like really spoke to me.
For companies, even like starting a podcast, I saw yesterday or earlier this week, Lockheed was like, I wasn't going to start a podcast 9 years ago. Everyone said I was already too late to the game. I'm so happy that I did it. Starting a podcast in 2025, I was like, oh, I'm so fucking late to the game. This is so stupid. Someone starting a mattress company in 2010 or whenever Purple came out, right?
Yeah.
Like, why do we need a new mattress company? It was a different mattress company. But are there companies that shouldn't try to create new categories?
Yeah, I do think, like, obviously there's plenty of companies that shouldn't create new categories, and I think it comes down to a simple view of, all right, do you want to have incremental growth or do you want to have exponential growth? And I think that's the difference, is if you're just trying to incrementally grow, competing where you're at and trying to eke out that extra dollar, yeah, sure. But if you really want to like create exponential opportunity and growth, and you believe you're doing something truly different and unique, then you're probably already creating a category. And if you just compete with an existing one, you're just resigning yourself to incremental growth, but you're going to probably do just about as much work and effort to get that incremental growth. So I would say like there are like certainly small businesses that need to serve a community and whatnot that hey, they're fine, healthy run business. But if you're looking to actually, if you think like, hey, what I'm doing is different, you give the Purple example. Let's take that. They were looking at it like, man, it really sucks to buy a mattress. You got to go to the store. You have to deal with salespeople. You have to then pick out the mattress, and they'll find a day, maybe in weeks, where they can deliver to you, or you can just go online, find out what you want, deliver it to your house, and the cost of that is way cheaper. Cut out all the middleman BS, mm-hmm. right? So I think that there's a lot of businesses that will look at things like Purple, things like Uber, even like taxi cabs suck, or even I look at like, a lot of people talk about liquid death, right? They're like, oh, it's great marketing. I'm like, no, they actually solved a real problem, that it's not cool to drink water when you're out. It actually, they give this plastic bottle and they made it cool to drink water. And especially with this trend line of this whole generation of like, hey, drinking less alcohol and they just want to have water at the club, they made it cool. And if you go and you see where they started and grew, it's like, yeah, it's great marketing, but at the end of the day, it's not cool to drink water was the problem they solved. Like, we made drinking water cool. And so those are pretty big shifts in, consumer goods areas. And they, in those areas, they recognize that this isn't, I need to make sure it's clear. I need to demarcate why I'm different, not just better. Right. And so the companies that are just saying, yeah, I'm going to have a better feature, that category design isn't for you. Mm-hmm. But if you really are doing something truly different, then you probably inherently already creating a new category. Do it with intention so that you can actually win in that.
In terms of teams that try this and flop, some are mentioned in the book. Is there a leadership issue? Is that they shouldn't be trying to do it? What are some things that get in the way when you're trying to create a category?
Yeah, I think we even mentioned in the book. I wish we could write explicitly about some of those things because those are where the real learnings are, right? Where it goes south. But I would say that the big ones that show up are, a lack of conviction and commitment from leadership as you get into it, as you get into uncovering like, whoa, this is a big thing. This is a very scary thing to go and say, I'm going to move away from surveys and go build experience management in Qualtrics' case, right? That was there's a story that we tell of Kylan Lundin was the CMO, and he was in the hours leading up to the launch of this new category was like sick in the parking lot, just like, what are we doing? We have this great growing business. Are we going to alienate ourselves from our existing customer base? But there was such strong conviction within that team of like, no, there's something bigger here. And if we don't do this, we won't be able to sleep at night, right? But where it goes south is where a founder or leader hedges and says, oh, maybe I want to kind of have both, best of both worlds, and not fully committing is a big one. And that comes down to like just this, did you find belief amongst your leadership team? And is that belief so strong that you can now spread it to the rest of the company? And then ultimately, because if you don't have belief and conviction within your own team, how are you going to get anyone else to believe in this new world? And so I would say that's the biggest one. There's a bunch of, we often talk about like, don't just trickle out the category. You really have to, what we call, do the lightning strike, like frame, name, and claim that category. Don't just be like, oh, we'll tiptoe out, because especially in highly competitive areas, someone will just come and take that work and do it right. And ultimately, then they get to be seen as now the leader. And everything you do after that is essentially validating their leadership position. So the reverse of the advantage of doing this right for in category design is, hey, you go out and put that stake in the ground. Then honestly, you're going to get your competition like, oh yeah, we're that too. We're doing that thing. Like a lot of people freak out, like they stole it all. I'm like, no, they just validated that the position you just did, the work that you just did, the category you just created. And now you're in the pole position. Now it's about executing on that. And they're number two, clearly, and you're number one. So I would say that lack of commitment, but there's plenty of other stories too we could go down of, where it went right, wrong, not establishing the RFP or the blueprint for the category, not doing all the work. And then also like there is a bit of there's this change management shift that has to take place in some of the bigger companies and operations where it's more than just having a point of view and putting it out there into the world and one lightning strike, but it's operationalizing your entire company around it, right? So if that doesn't go well, you can you see this, what we call in the book, gravity, reversion back to sort of old behaviors and old ways of thinking. And, oh, this is the way I used to sell, and this is the way I'm going to sell. Oftentimes the work really changes sales motion, product roadmaps, and all that. And there might be a rebellion or two within one of those divisions that if they're not snuffed out pretty quickly, then they can undermine we have a couple of stories where that played out with full out rebellion from, say, the engineering team saying, no, I was building a platform. I don't want to build, applications on top of that. Right?
Yeah. And then you've got your Zeds.
That's right. The Zeds. And I always talk a lot about Zeds now as like, it's a mindset that we have to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
You can't overcome the mindset, then you have to get rid of the individuals, right? We talk in the book, it's like, you just can't have them around. And some of those rebellions too, where, even for example, Qualtrics, the sales team was not on board with this new way of selling. And Ryan Smith, CEO and founder, Jared and team, that executive team, and said, all right, either you're on board or you're out. And so they really went all in. And they lost a lot of people because of that, but it was absolutely the right decision, right? And so it is those hard friction points where it's going to be different from this point on. And oftentimes when we talk about this commitment or burning the boat ceremony internally is like, hey, this is our new direction. This is the point of view that we have now, what we're going to go do. Everyone plays a role in making this reality now moving forward. And if you don't buy into it, then we have to part ways.
And the book and your website has tons of resources. So if someone's like, how do I do it? It's like, it's right there, what to follow. And you can always reach out to your team to help.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what we try to, and even in, the EMT, we put 3 examples of the 13. I think we detailed 3 sins, right? We went through stories with DocuSign, Qualtrics, Clear Metal. But since then, we published other sins with other examples too. So we're episodically releasing more content from our newsletter and whatnot, just to get that stuff out there. But we felt like the book needed to get out into the thinking around the EMT needed to be out in the world. So we published the primer, but we're going to continue to build from that work and build on that work. And hopefully to help founders, one, recognize the trap before they fall into it, or how to get out of it if they are in it.
That's what my next question was. What's next for this? It's got 3 deep dives into 3 of the traps. And then you have those playing cards where someone could just keep on their desk. Are those still available?
No, we just kind of did that as a one-off fun
thing. That was cute.
Yeah.
They could keep them on their desk so you can...
I mean, if the demand skyrocketed for those, I'm sure we could put them back into production, but it was just sort of something, a way for us to get those sins, an easy way to have it, to remember the 13 deadly sins.
So is there going to be more from this?
Yeah. So there's already I think we've already dropped an additional deadly sin, point tool. What was the point tool ceiling? And that's in our blog. But again, we publish this through every time we have we'll put a newsletter out with a new sin. And I think we've been working on 2 or 3 more that will be coming out over the course of the next couple of weeks and months. So would encourage people to subscribe to the newsletter. We try and get that stuff out in people's hands. And and building on the thinking in EMT is absolutely. And it seems like the new way of writing a book too is like, hey, let's do this with the community and then bundle it all together and publish.
A lot of mini books these days too.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's fun. Looking ahead, is there a book or podcast that's been inspiring you?
Oh man, I mean, there's so many things that I love to learn. I love the ideas that you then get exposed to as you intersect with these really brilliant ideas and minds at these different companies. I think I'm also like a big fan of some of the leaders in capital allocation, like the VCs and partners that we work with there. Bill Gurley, I've always loved Bill Gurley. And so I think his book that's coming out is one that I'm really looking forward to. I love the BG2 Squared podcast with Bill Gurley and Brad Gerstner. And I always thought he was really smart about market dynamics, technology, startups, founders, and just in general, just business principles. And so he's putting out a new book. In fact, I think he's stepping away from the podcast in order to really throw his weight behind his, what is it, like Chasing a Dream, or I'm trying to think of his, it comes out in a couple of months. Yeah. Running Down a Dream. That's what it was. So I'm looking forward to that. Probably read that. I even like a lot of the work that we do also, like, it actually jumpstarts other work. So one thing is pricing and packaging. I've always been fascinated about how do you actually think about pricing and packaging. Almost always when we go through this work with our companies, it does beg the question of like, we got to rethink how we sell this thing. Like, if this is what we're actually building, it's not just this thing. We have to think about how do you price it, right? And so there's like Madhavan he wrote a great book that I'm just diving into around what was how do you price innovation essentially. And he's a partner at Simon and Schuster, which is like one of the key firms that does a lot of this pricing and packaging work. And I think it's called Monetizing Innovation. That's right. So that book I'm looking forward to. And honestly, that came from a podcast that I was listening. I found that from a podcast from the Library of Minds podcast, which is actually a company that we work with, Delphi, does these digital minds, right, of great thinkers so that you can actually interact with them. In fact, Al, our principal, he built one of these within Delphi. And then they do a podcast interviewing them and then saying, go talk to Al through this digital mind, right? And it's actually amazing how good these digital minds are now, right, with the AI. And so that's a great, like, the Library of Minds is a cool podcast because they have these luminaries, and Manhattan was one of the minds that they did and then interviewed in the podcast. So there's a connection right there for you. There's a couple.
Okay, well, I'll put the links in the description for sure.
Yeah.
Your bio says that you believe the pace of today's technology-led change requires a bias for continuous learning and transformation on both a personal and organizational level. That's what this podcast is for. Keep going, keep growing. What's one thing you're excited to learn or dive into this year? Work or not work?
Work or not work? That's a great question. Honestly, I love the fact that I just did this too, where, hey, our fairly new fridge just crapped out in our house, right? And I'm like, all right, what went wrong? Power went out, right? Just be able to look up and say, oh, the control board is probably broken. Can I order a new control board? How do I replace like that type of stuff? Just being like we've had our house for a couple of years now, but being able to do that around everything around like I love learning that stuff. So there's a project on like deck building that I'm like, I'm not a carpenter by any means. But I'm like, you know what? I feel like I could learn this good enough to be serviceable, right?
Yeah.
So that type of stuff, I always love doing that, getting like the satisfaction of doing something with your hands and completing projects and just being like, oh, yeah, I did that. So I'm looking forward to doing more of that around the property here. And then like the pricing and packaging stuff is fascinating to me. We go pretty deep on it with our companies, but even like going deeper on that thinking is always fascinating. We do a lot of work too on, depending on the companies we're working with, but on like, how do you go into a strike ops model and continue to tune that into the world that we have today with, yes, there's instantaneous content creation, but how do you operationalize a point of view around these strike moments and what does lightning strike look like? So constantly rethinking even like there's the traditional tried and true event into how do you create a moment in time now in today's day and age? So that stuff I'm always digging into and learning about.
Those are fun topics. The pricing one especially. Does it get into comp? Because that's where I get really pumped.
The compensation?
Yeah.
I don't think it does. I think it's more of like what's the value you're creating? How do you extract value as you create value, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also, how do you do this in particular? Like we're working with a company that's about to launch, right? So what's the first anchoring that you have on pricing is so like the importance of that is just so important, right? Get that wrong, you anchor it wrong and you're screwed, right? You're trying to like, how do you go back and say, no, we're creating way more value. So we want to charge more. So yeah, I think that's what I think is really interesting. Is like, how do you do it right out of the gates and not get into a hole or a situation where you're having to unwind that and potentially, do the process of like, we're going to crush our revenue going through this, but does it serve the long term? Even as like the software as a service starts like in token, like the pricing models that have to shift as you move into more AI driven systems and the cost of scale with AI is, I think, fascinating too. And like, what is that going to look like? Right. And price per seat doesn't really work. Right. Usage is more important, but also like getting closer to what I love about where Alvin and them go is like, as you get closer to actually value creation, you can price based off of value creation, right? Or outcome really is what he's talking about, is outcome based pricing. But if you're more like optimizing things and it's a degree removed from outcome, then you have to think about pricing models differently. So that's sort of just the broad framing that he brings to. I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense.
I'll have to check out Library of Minds and then the book. I had fun today.
Yeah.
Did you?
Absolutely. Gave some cogent, clear answers, but
yeah. If someone's new to category design, you definitely laid out what it is, what it's not, and then they can always check out the site. I'll leave links for how to follow on the newsletter because that's great.
Yeah. We really try to make the newsletter about valuable content. It's not self-promotional. It's intended to be like the books. Like, get this information in people's hands, help spread and we think that if you are the leader, that's what you do. You grow the category, you spread the category belief. And yeah, inherently that will accrue to you in the end as it comes down to a business thing.
Thank you for your time and sharing your wisdom today. And thank you everybody else for listening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.